Recovery Reform is a podcast that provides educational content while addressing the stigma against drugs and the people who use them. Expertise meets lived experience as the hosts and their respective guests unpack the multifaceted cause that is recovery reform. Welcome back to the Recovery Reform podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Taylor, and one of my good friends, Kristina Dennis. Kristina is an ethical interventionist, and so we're going to be just hanging out talking today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both for having me. It's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Taylor and McCauley. Yeah, we've known each other for quite some time, so I'm excited to be here.
I'm just going to start off right now, and then Taylor, I'll give you the floor so you can kind of go into some questions. So first of all, if you're comfortable, I just kind of want to hear your experience leading up to your healing process or your recovery process, and really just anything that you kind of want to share as it relates to that.
Sure. Well, I mean, like many people who find relief and are dopamine charged, I found myself at 21 very happy with large quantities of alcohol until I wasn't happy. And, I was driven. I worked very, very hard. I moved out on my own when I was 17 because of, a traumatic kind of childhood. Lots of peaks and lots of lows. And at 27, I was exhausted. It was just one of those things. And I remember throwing a massive party and everybody that I knew was there. And I had passed out like usual, very early. And the next morning I woke up and decided I would start drinking again, which is not something I ever did. I was strangely disciplined in where I drank. Well, a lot of us are, a lot of people who we know how to take care of ourselves, right? And so I decided I was going to quit my job because the job was the problem. And then made a deal with somebody I knew who had kind of carried a torch with me for a long time, a torch for me that I would go ahead and marry him if I didn't have to work. It was insane. And, he came right over and it's like, great, yeah, no problem. And then the next morning I woke up and thought, no, that's insane. And so I went into work and I naively said, I think I might have a drinking problem. And my supervisor at the time, Rich, said, well, okay, what are you going to do about it? And I said, I guess I'll quit drinking. Like literally it was that non-dramatic. But they introduced me to an employee assistance program. And that was the beginning of my journey into this whole world. I truly was one of those people who had never heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. This was close to 27 years ago. This is what outpatient provided. And I met a couple of really great people and started down that road. I didn't stay in Alcoholics Anonymous for that long because I found it to not be very safe. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. The philosophy, or at least the groups that I have been around, were really bent on us being, are we allowed to swear?
Sure.
Okay. On us being, real ego puncturing behaviors and actions. And frankly, I didn't need to be, have it reinforced that I was a piece of shit. I already felt like that. And so I intuitively moved into different groups to really get my circle. And over the years, I would occasionally visit a 12-step group. I mean, I do belong to a 12-step group, but not the main one, the first one. And I always had that feeling of this doesn't really work for me. This isn't going to help me heal. I didn't find any resources around the trauma that I had most definitely experienced. and I was hungry to feel better and whole. And that really, within a year, I was already out and about looking for other places to get the support that I needed.
Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, I'm always curious about sort of what drives people to the point of feeling that they want to, obtain abstinence, that they want to quit drinking or whatever, stop using their drug of choice. For you, it sounded like you just got tired of it and it anticlimactically just told your boss, right?
Oh yeah, there was a big story around inpatient rehab, that we know a girl who quit drinking because she missed a day at work. And what was really funny was that might have been how good I was at holding up appearances and being a high level executive and working, but inside I was very, very bankrupt emotionally.
And I take it you didn't marry that guy.
No, but I love him still. I mean, I'm sorry, Joe. I didn't. I married a few others though. So that's the only thing that I haven't done is not pick up a quote alcoholic drink. There have been plenty. I mean, my 20 plus years in on this side of my drinking story have been very exciting, and I have definitely explored all the avenues and really had to had to get to that level of complete acceptance of who I am.
Yeah, I just want to briefly kind of mention something that you went into that I think is very, very important, and I think a lot of people, it would serve them to understand this, that substance use disorders and alcohol use disorder, it develops on a spectrum. So people do not have to reach this rock bottom moment, and it all is subjective ultimately, but even the term rock bottom is insinuating that it's like this very disastrous scenario. So it's like, you can be in a position to where you make a decision, you're like, hey, I want to seek healing and recovery. Now the tricky thing is actually getting that treatment if you are not manifesting very chaotically. So did you find that was an aspect of it? Like, obviously there was a narrative as it related to your experience within the treatment space, but like, what was it like with peers? What was it like? That's something I'm really interested in.
Very, very well. I was in the hotel business. I ran a very large hotel, and so my peers drank as I did. They did as I did. And there were many of them. Even my closest long-term friend was like, oh, no, you're not that. Come on. You just had a bad night. I had a lot of, I don't know, in the old world, we called them enablers. But there were a lot of people that didn't understand. I was probably one of the first people, I was the first person in our group that decided, no, this really doesn't work for me. And since then, since we've had the education, I understand exactly why it really brought more terror for me to consume alcohol. I started to learn that. But in the beginning, I absolutely did not understand why I was so convicted, but I knew I was. I see alcohol for me in the way that I was raised in the chaos. It saved my life for many years. I'm grateful for it. I'm very grateful that I found it, because I would have not been here if I hadn't. That's why I'm such a fan of harm reduction, because, it's like when I'm working with families or parents, well, do you want a dead child, or do you want a child who's still working toward, this supposed perfect 100% abstinence, which might be impossible for some people. And I know as a parent, I want a child who's alive. I want someone who can continue to work through it. And so I very much raised myself, and I guess that there was just this survival instinct in me that pushed. Now, when I called the numbers they gave me, because I had basically taken off the mask when I said, I can't do this, I need help. And they walked me down to HR, and all I know is that I was just so tired and wanting to rest and wanting a way out of this insanity, this lifestyle that was exhausting me. When they gave me some numbers, I called, and I remember her asking me, "How do you want to drink today?" And I thought that was just like the weirdest question, because I had gone 2 weeks without drinking, when I was on antibiotics, right? Because I wanted to get well.
Yeah.
And so I was like, no, I'm not going to drink today, weirdo. It's okay. And then she asked me my numbers, and I was so confident in those numbers. I was like, oh yeah, no, it takes me seven alcoholic drinks a night to go to sleep. And if I'm really partying, I can consume up to 23, 24 cocktails, throw up halfway through and keep going. And I didn't realize, because alcohol, there's such a lie around the alcohol industry, so I didn't realize that how health-wise it was devastating me. And so I think they thought pretty clearly that I needed the help. Now they put me in outpatient. And when I found out that you could go inpatient and not work for 30 days, I was pretty pissed, because that would have been my drug. I want to do crafts. I don't want to keep working. But the director of the outpatient clinic was a very, very amazing woman. And when she met with me, she knew that I needed that help. For the first time in my life, I was looking for help.
One of the things you mentioned, and as a harm reductionist myself, I appreciated you sort of keying in on harm reduction. And, there's the expression, dead friends can't recover. And then, McCauley and I have the thought that may differ from some, that recovery looks different for everybody. I know some people don't like that expression because they say, oh, well, not everybody has to obtain abstinence. And my argument is that doesn't have to be what recovery means to them. Right?
No,
but I do think dead friends can't recover no matter what. Dead sons and daughters and all that.
Friends.
And I also, when I talk to people, and there's obviously a lot of shame, especially when you hit that point. And a lot of people have a difficult time with the idea of like self-forgiveness. So I like to tell people that substance use is often the logical choice, that the act of existing in the world makes it such that trying to alter your level of consciousness or alter your state of being makes sense, is the logical decision. If you are in a situation that is harming you, then finding an escape can be life-saving.
Right.
And that's okay. Right. And we need to be turning ourselves away from this idea that somehow any substance use is harmful and illogical, because it's just not true. It just doesn't make sense. Like, we have been doing this as a human species for as long as we can at least track in history, right? As long as we know, we've been trying to find different ways of altering our consciousness. And, McCauley and I have talked about this before. I'm a child of a parent with substance use disorders, and one of the arguments he's made to me that is sort of irrefutable is the act of, as a child, the act of like spinning yourself around until you're dizzy is the initial act of like altering your level. You're altering your perception of reality.
Exactly.
The act of being human is to experience what it's like to alter your perception of reality. And like you're saying, Kristina, it's like, it may be the logical decision to save your life if you are in a situation that's harming you. And I think I want people to accept and understand that, and that recovery doesn't mean that you have to be abstinent from everything all the time. It means whatever it is to you. To the true definition of the word recovery is to recover something, right? It is to regain something that you've lost. And if you don't have something to lose, then what are you recovering? Yeah. So I'm a addiction medicine physician, and one of the things literally in the diagnostic codes, when I'm diagnosing somebody as who is quote unquote in recovery, the diagnostic code is in remission, right? It is opioid use disorder in remission. So I use that term in my language when I'm speaking to somebody. It's like, I don't know if you're in recovery or not, because I don't know what you're recovering. I don't know how you view that. What I do know is that you are in remission from your substance. Yes. You are maintaining abstinence from your drug of choice. That is my goal as their physician, to be taking care of them and helping them find their recovery their way, whatever that looks like for them. And in that case, it may be obtaining abstinence from opioids, right? But the literal diagnostic code is opioid use disorder in remission. So we need to reframe our thinking about this and about the idea that somehow substance use is inherently harmful, that it can't have a logical start, right? A lot of the framing, the negative framing, or the shaming of people is around, well, they could have, it's a choice. And when you say, oh, well, it actually, there is a neurobiologic basis for addiction. And
yes.
So what are you saying? They should have never used? Oh, well, that was a choice. Okay, fair. What about the part where that was logical and that saved your life?
Correct.
What about that part, right? 90% of people who might start drinking won't develop alcohol use disorder, but it may save their life and then they can stop drinking. 10% of people don't hit that point, and that's okay. We should provide help instead of shaming them, which is kind of what, and I know McCauley wants to ask specifically about this, but that's kind of what we're getting at here, is where did that part come in? Because I know you sort of turned away from the shaming, the harmful sort of stigmatizing model that you were mentioning. And I'd love to get into that a little bit of what does that look like? What did that look like for you?
Absolutely. Well, I have done, and a lot of my intervention work with others is really around family systems and childhood trauma. And the one 12-step program that I really love for self-growth, when the person is ready, is the adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional family, because it is really quite a wonderful program. You work in a workbook, you don't have a sponsor. There's none of this authoritative, patriarchal, bullshit that's running around. It's very harmful in some groups that I've been in. They are spewing lies, and they're cornering people and not giving them any way to get out if they can't possibly reach this goal of 100%. And then, what happens when you don't know there's alcohol in a drink and you take a sip? I mean, people are questioning, well, do I have my sobriety? And I mean, come on, that's insane. I know people who don't take aspirin. That the level to the extreme is so prevalent, at least in many of the places that I was in. However, it's so black and white and so harmful. And then on the other side, there's no relief for trauma. There's no relief for going through things, because the way that the 12 steps are dictated, you only work on your resentments, and you do this, oh, I'm going to write a letter and it'll be done. And that's just not the way it works. I've worked with people who were very harmed, who were told to make amends to the people that had sexually assaulted them when they were children, because they had a resentment. And so that's when I really started questioning, when I saw people who were put on pedestals for not doing something for a long time, but they had no spiritual growth in other areas, and I was like, this is not working. This is not how it should work. The old timers held this level of, authority in the group, even though they say there isn't one. And, people that are newer, that are falling, maybe not being able to do it, they cut them out. It's kind of crazy. Like what they actually say about, you keep coming back, you're always welcome here. That doesn't really happen. If you happen to be a chronic relapser, you are often pushed out. I don't even like using that word. When you're, okay, I don't want to be all over the place, but I started working with food food issues very shortly after letting go of sobriety or letting go of alcohol because of the sugar content. And in that particular program, they say make your road really wide in the beginning. And that is such a more gentle way to approach it, to move forward. So my perspective started changing when I saw some very bad behavior and some absolute holes in the process that, I've done all of these 4 steps. I've done all this, and I still have an incredible amount of pain from real harm that had been done to me. What am I supposed to do with that? Because that was what I needed relief from to begin with. So I'm not sure I answered your question because it's such a big topic. We could talk for hours and hours about what needs to be done. But I just know that if, as an interventionist, as a person who maybe is a leader in the community, that shame should have nothing to do with this. For instance, the AIDS pandemic, right? The epidemic. In the 80s, it was very based in shame and morality. But us as a society in the 40 years have learned how to look at it as less of a moral issue, right?
We're never going to solve for problems when we simply moralize them, right?
Exactly.
We're never going to solve complex issues by simply making it a moral problem. And one of the things you mentioned is, the shame and the shaming from within the system that comes from returning to using.
Yes.
And it's ironic to me because we're trying to create a recovery system for people with a disorder that is defined by returning to use. It is a relapsing remitting condition.
Yes.
And McCauley's heard me say this just so many times, but I like to use the analogy of multiple sclerosis, which is a known relapsing remitting condition that when somebody is relapsing, that their immune system is attacking them. We don't shame them for that.
No.
We don't say, oh gosh, those meds aren't working, nothing we can do. You must have failed morally. We jump on it and we try to address it immediately and get them back into remission. And it's why we can't simply do the same thing medically and say, okay, you return to using with your chronic relapsing remitting condition. Let's get you back into remission if that's your goal. And that's the thing that's I find is part of the hurtfulness of from within the recovery community. When you have recovery spaces, say some particular 12-step programs that will say, oh, you failed because you have a chronic relapsing remitting condition and you relapsed. How is that supportive? It's literally defines the condition. It just drives me so crazy because if you want to support people with that condition, then you treat it in the way that addresses the condition, right? So the same way you would with multiple sclerosis, you just help them. And if we provided people a non-shameful, non-stigmatizing way to address that, then we would be doing better. We'd have higher success rates than we see from recovery communities that are based in that shame and that stigma.
Yes, that's so important that you said that, because that's the first thing that we need to understand, is that the actual what we have out there, widely known, is so defended to the point where we cannot open our eyes to change. And when we know that only 3 to 5% actually, quote, stay and keep going, that's a dismal failure, right? In the scientific world, that is not a solution. So obviously we need to change. And if countries like Portugal has done a program where they really support the individual. They get them a good job. They help them stay. They're there for them. There's no shame around it. And I think that last time I checked, the numbers were something like 95%. Obviously, that works. And when you do the research on, as an interventionist, at least in the place that I was trained, we learned what happens with, groups of people where there's been a natural disaster, or, World War II, genocide, and we see it generation after generation. The generation that lived through it doesn't process the trauma, doesn't know how to do that. They have another generation, epigenetics. Then they get to the third generation, and that person is acting, is basically sacrificing themselves to save the family, to say, let's talk about it. I mean, we have lots of studies that show that in whole communities that never embraced, and I'm just going to talk about alcohol right now because that's what the study was based on. And so when you look at that, you realize that this one person, the identified patient, is actually the brave one, because they're willing to speak out and say, I can't do this. The way y'all are doing it, shutting down, is not working.
I think people that are in that position that actually are manifesting with substance use disorder often feel like the scapegoat in those scenarios, because everything becomes obvious if you are using certain substances, especially substances that are criminalized, and then there you are, there's a spotlight on you. But I definitely can say that just that alone, just that coming to the surface is ultimately a huge opportunity to address that cycle. And that's what really draws me to your approach with someone who went through a very traditional intervention. And before I kind of go on, I want to just kind of briefly touch on what you said in response to Taylor's question. I think you very clearly laid it out, how you made decisions for yourself, which is something that people with substance use disorder are they're disempowered within that space and told, no, you don't know. Your best thinking got you here. And you're a prime example of someone who was no, I'm going to find what I need to do and I'm going to do it. And that's what I had to do too. And the thing is that's where I think it's really important to touch on, this kind of vibe, if you will, of subservience that a lot of us are often coerced and pushed into, and I think it's really just an important point, in your story, is that you made decisions. You made decisions to shift out of certain spaces and go into others, and that's people pay lip service to it, and just because they know culturally that if you discourage certain things, that it's not okay. But if you get people one-on-one behind closed doors, they'll straight up discourage things, but I just, again, I'll go, I'm going to ask you another question, but I want to just make one more statement really quick and just say that it's my main thing, kind of touching on what you were also saying, Taylor, is that my main issue now is that we're looking at really high evidence medication, and then we're looking at superstition and spirituality. And it's let's go ahead with the superstition and spirituality. Now, I kind of avoid leading with or even talking about my own spiritual stuff. I'm super, super spiritual. I, used to lucid dream when I was a child. I used to, what some people call astral project. Right. I'm not going to get too new agey and weird here, but that's the background I come from. And so, it's a very large privilege to end up in spaces that are being led with religion disguised as spirituality. I mean, I'm sorry, just when we look at the Oxford group and the origins of 12-step. But I don't know, do you feel that wasn't a hang up for you, and that were you in a position to where you were just I'm not even going to really entertain any of that because you were more spiritually inclined as a person? Or what are your thoughts on just all of my rantings as it relates to the spiritual aspect? Do you agree that do you think it's wrong to to mention spirituality in the conversation of healing and recovery. What are your thoughts on that, if any of that made any sense?
Complete sense. Well, for my personal story, I had been abused through religion. It was what you had. It is what we had, back then. And in the old times, that's what we had. And so for me, it was a relief to see certain individuals who would not have been accepted in my very abusive Southern Baptist home speak of God. And the God that they introduced was a very loving God. So I was thirsty to just be accepted. And it didn't hold me up. But now, this many years later, and knowing that my own lived experience is not everybody's lived experience, and each person has different parts, I don't think that introducing spirituality as a blanket kind of approach to helping is appropriate, right away. If the person, so I'm very, I have a son with profound autism. He's taught me a lot about substance use disorder, right? Because I see it. I see the similarities. Not only do I see it, I know the genes, the DNA, the MTHR gene that affects many of us, where they can literally predict through your DNA that chances are you might have an issue with this. And so I think everybody has to be treated very individually. And I think it's precarious to bring in anything extra in the beginning outside of making this person physically better. And I do think it takes a long time, from what I've been trained, it takes 18 months for 50% of our brain to be more engaged. And I'm not saying it right because I'm not a medical doctor. So, but, I remember very clearly that statistic. And I also know for me, I wasn't privy to any of that. I could not have been an expert in any of that. I was just echoing what people were telling me. And I do believe that I have a very strong faith in the universe. I don't have a problem practicing religion with certain places where it's really based on they will know us because of how we love each other. But there aren't a lot of those spaces around. I can speak scripture with the best of them because of the way I was raised. But the reading that I read says that we should sell our belongings and help widows and children. And that's a big part of, that book.
I just want to say, I totally get where you're coming from with witnessing that, and specifically witnessing people who were what I would call engaging in like a superstitious practice, but that's just my judgment of that. So it's like, I support that. I don't encourage that, but I will support someone in doing that. And I had the same experience to where I was like, oh, wow, like this is kind of cool. And for me, it was really just that it gave me a sense that people were getting some sort of relief. And there's a lot of relief that you can get from superstitious practice, spiritual practices. And it sounds so condescending for me to sit here and just lead with calling it superstitious. But, I do believe that people do have practices that are very, very legitimate for them. And that's a great thing for them. But yeah, I hold the same sentiment when it came to that.
You were saying that you just wanted to find a place to belong. And I get that. And that's sort of the danger kind of like what McCauley's talking about, and it sounds like related to your background all the same, is that is where people can become coerced and be pushed into these positions of being disempowered. And that's the problem, is it's not just disempowerment, it is constant reflection on the negative and the past. And part of our human nature is to be moving forward, to have a goal to move towards. And it doesn't, I tell people this all the time. It's like, it doesn't require forgiveness of anybody else. It doesn't require forgiveness of yourself. And I know that somewhat flies in the face of the working the steps, right? It's like, you don't have to forgive anybody, but you do have to move forward, right? That's part of living. That part of the act of living is you have to move forward, and part of our nature is to want to move towards something. And so finding a way to find the positives, and it doesn't have to be in yourself, like, oh, I have to forgive myself for the harm that I've caused, or for how I feel ashamed of what I did, or for drinking or whatever, right? You don't have to forgive yourself either. You don't have to forgive anybody else, but you have to keep working towards something just to move forward. And so
I like the idea of acceptance versus the word of forgiveness. Because I think that for a lot of the people I've worked for and worked with and myself, forgave is like such a strange concept, because you're saying, like, somewhere in my mind means that I'm never going to have a feeling about it again, and it's all good.
Right.
What I believe is really more important is to accept that this is what happened, this is what is, and now I can quit trying to change the past, and I can move forward. 100%. You're exactly right. Moving forward, saying, okay, that happened. And, I have a lot of fun with some of the mistakes, or maybe more exciting routes that I chose. Lots of experience. If we're working with someone, I can usually say, oh yeah, I did that. I mean, I've been married 3 times, because I like being married, I guess, and then not, and then like it. So, we're all at our place.
I did want to get into that about your experience in terms of working with other people with either in active use, or who are seeking recovery, who are in remission. Right. What does that look like for you? What does your work look like? And talk to us a little bit about the framing of like ethical interventionist versus, say, less ethical. Right. Because I think that's a really important and actually like a huge topic that we could probably talk for a long time about. And I know McCauley has a lot of feelings about too. But I would love to hear sort of your perspective on that.
Well, it's interesting because my expertise, or my special interests, on the spectrum as well, is the codependency and relationships, that happen. And so a lot of my clients look like, and men and women, when I first started working with people, I thought I'll always work with women, right? It just, because I think that's another thing from 12-step, you're not allowed. And instead I find myself having, millennial men wanting to work with me. I don't usually deal with physical sobriety first, because I get most of my clients from referrals from places that are, helping people get through that. I get referrals to work with their family members, but I also work a lot with people who have, quote, long-term physical abstinence and are at the same spirit, crisis of, I've done everything that this program told me to do, and I still hate my life, and it doesn't make sense. So a lot of my work has been around deconstructing all of those belief systems about resentment, all of the kind of harmful messages that are being sent through. And look, it isn't just 12 steps. Our whole world has grown since the 30s, and our whole understanding of emotions have grown. So a lot of the people that I work with are people that, okay, I got the physical down. It's not, I'm doing okay, but now I want to actually like myself, and I want to learn how to handle my family issues, and I want to understand. And so each person that comes to me usually has, usually we're looking at 6 months, minimum. I have worked with people up to 3 years because they were a little more at the beginning of their journey. But Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it looks like. I don't believe, like I said, the identified patient, that's all they are. The entire family system needs to be addressed. And sometimes you can do that with the entire family, which is the way I work. If I am helping somebody start their journey, you know, if a family member has called me and said, we need help, then it's going to be the whole family. And we're going to start with a genealogram that explains the family's history and how this one person is not the issue. They're just the bravest one or the one shouting the loudest. So what it looks like, someone calls me, usually it would be a parent, I was referred to you, or I am a parent, I was referred to you. And what it looks like is we start figuring out what kind of route, and the identified patient is involved in all of it. You know, they know we're talking about it. They have been briefed and they've had grace given to them. Sometimes it might just be me modeling that, you know, to other family members until they can catch on. It might be me working just with the parent who then is working with the facility. It really is very individualized depending on what they need. And it also matters the age of the person. You know, teenagers are a little different. Their brains are not fully formed, right? Till we're 25. And there's some kind of authority that the parents have over them. And we have to work through that too, in a way that gives the child or a, you know, teenager a very respectful boundary. But, you know, teenagers need to know their parents are really in charge. And that's usually what's happened, is they don't know. And, you know, the parents are behaving in a way that is more like an adult child. And we have to really kind of grow from there. But yeah, all I can say is that my approach is very transparent with everybody. And that's really important. Yeah. And if one person tries to call me on the side, these are kind of the guidelines, then I say, oh, wait, let's table this till we meet this week. That way everybody is involved.
McCauley, I know we've talked about this before, but you've been through an ambush intervention. I'd love to hear sort of your perspective here as you're hearing this. What you think or how you feel like that could be different.
There's a lot of things that I've been exposed to throughout my process that have helped me to kind of heal my inner child when it comes to like seeing that things exist that are different. And so for me, that's like the work I do with non-medical caretaking and watching people that are allowed to claim their autonomy while they're going through detox, and they can have their partner, their husband, their wife, their loved one with them while they're going through it. Talking to you, and I didn't know that there was I didn't know there was a kind of a modality that was more in alignment with like just humanity and just being like, hey, like we're all gonna come together and talk about this. So like my experience with it is that it was a an ambush intervention, and it was
right.
effective in getting me into treatment. Okay, so I can say that is real. Now that again, like when you look at efficacy of interventions, it's because they are coercive, in my opinion. So it's like super effective. And now when we consider what you touched on, teenagers, guess what happens to them? They're kidnapped with the consent of their parents and brought to a wilderness program. So, that's super effective to pick up a child that cannot, physically get away and put them in a van. I'm pretty sure you can get people into treatment that way. So yes. It makes me just happy to know that people don't have to do it the way that I did it. And that's the issue, is like within recovery spaces, it's all about what you did and how you did it and getting other people to do the same thing. And I don't want anyone to do the same thing that I did. Like I really, that's part of my main, that's like one of the main parts of my advocacy is like, ideally, you you don't have to experience a coercive treatment model at any capacity. Now, yeah, when I think about, the aspect of personal responsibility within the family unit, that was so important for me in my process, was having conversations with my mom and going like, this really hurt me and traumatized me. But that is not the conversation that's had generally in these intervention settings and in treatment within what they call family programs. So I, went through these family programs with, again, touching back on what you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the shame aspect. And, I was put in a position to where I'm in a circle with a bunch of random people's families, and the closest people in my life,
Right.
which was my long-term partner and my mom, we're sitting there and reading these letters that should not have been read in front of random people. And so I'll kind of segue into the writing assignments, because I want to ask you a little bit about that, because that's, for me, it just felt like you're taking someone who is abundantly aware of usually their own behavior, why they're doing certain things, and that usually a lot of people are masking and presenting, or what people call minimizing, but in reality, that's just how you make it in our in our culture, and continue to do the thing that is often, like Taylor was touching on, saving your life. Like that's the mechanism. That is how you do that. You're not going to sit there usually and go like, yeah, this is all terrible, and like that's already there. That self-awareness is there. But the point being is the fact that there's usually no emphasis on like, hey, like, we understand that this could contribute to it, this could contribute to it, my behavior could contribute to it. That alone is so human and rooted in such accountability and such just compassion, that alone will make people very, very willing to entertain healing. And that's the thing, is like, you can leverage love in a coercive way, which is usually what is done in the traditional setting, or you can love someone so much that you enable them to embody their autonomy, and so I want to get off my soapbox here, but what are your thoughts on like the format of these letters, and like what does that look like for you?
Well, one thing I want to back up real quick and say, one thing that I share with families is that the result of this may not include a person going into a program. That's not what, I mean, we'd like that, but it doesn't always work like that. It may be the first seed, and I think that you're right in saying that when I approach it from a place of true love and true, understanding at least my circumstances and people I've worked with, and the whole family is there owning up to their part, it makes it a lot easier for the person to say, yeah, I want to do this. It also can look like, I don't want to, I want to do an outpatient, or I actually want to work with you specifically. There's so many different ways to help this person and the family at the same time. I am not, I think it's really traumatizing to say to someone who's very, exhausted, I'm guessing, who has the shame already. That's why their cycle is continuing over and over again, that it's very harmful to go ahead and put that in black and white and make sure that they don't ever forget it. That's not what helps people want to move forward, like you were discussing. And once people want to go, forget it, you're never going to understand, I'm done. I'm very respectful about each individual's trauma. And I do think people that have been affected by the person's, behavior, they have a right to speak that. But maybe with somebody who isn't about to die, like they need to be supported too. So I think it's okay, but why are you asking the person who has very few resources to take that on? I mean, to me, it's like, it's just not a great feeling. And I try to be very clear about that with people. And sometimes when they have kind of gone down that road, I realize, oh, that person needs more help. And I will say it like that. You know what? You're right. All of your feelings are valid, but that's not going to help our situation right now. So let's figure out what we need to do to get you some support to get through this. Because while that person is, fighting for, let's say they are at the brink, their health is very precarious. While they're fighting for their life, you need to be having the time that you are also addressing your issues. And the person who's fighting for your life is not qualified to help you address your issues. They don't have it to give to you. So you're only making it worse.
I appreciate the way that you are to lean on, the name of our podcast. You are reforming not just the intervention space, but sort of the therapeutic space around treating people. And we have to focus on that first. We're treating people with substance use disorder. And I say that specifically, like the idea of using person first language matters because you are giving people autonomy and you are expressing that through the language that you're using.
Right.
And so I kind of want to hear a little bit about, and we can close with this, is if you had the ability to just reform what the recovery community looks like, having sort of been on both sides of it, having gone through this, your own process of sort of waking up to how this could work and seeing it yourself and actively doing this, how would you go about that? What would you do? What would you change?
Sure. Well, I think I would start with education of everyone involved about the fact that there is a genetic component, there's an epigenetic component. There are a lot of things that contribute to somebody, going down this path. That the person who's going down this path already knows all the things that they've done. They don't need more awareness shoved down their throat. What they need from you is love and acceptance. And maybe it's okay to show that you're a little afraid. Maybe that is an okay thing to share with them. I'm really scared I'm going to lose you and I don't want to lose you. I think that it has to be about human life and the value of human life. And that once that is like the first thing that we address, that's the triage of it, then we get that person into a place that is tailored for them. Recovery includes not only, interpersonal relationships. It includes diet. It includes the right possible medication. It includes exploring other diagnoses if they need to be addressed. It includes giving the person a time out in the world. And I think that it should be, a minimum of 6 months that the family is supporting them. Maybe they do need a medical detox so that we all know it's the most, alcohol is still the most dangerous drug to detox of. It still kills more than any other drug. And so there's just definitely a medical component that has to be addressed. But you start with education. You start with showing the person that you love them and why you love them. And you come up with some kind of plan that works for them and you, and you get busy learning how to heal your family, because it is healing your family. It is not just healing an individual. Now, that being said, there are families that are so toxic that the individual needs to remove themselves from them. I had one of those. They couldn't pursue healing because the family didn't want to participate, and it was not great. And I mean, I've said some pretty outrageous things to clients, like, "Oh, just disassociate while you're there. You know how to do that." You know what I mean? You're not going to get a badge for confronting them at the dinner. Just, have somebody texting you, like things that maybe are not, quote, like grown up. But it is a matter of surviving that day and really finding out what needs to work. So we've got diet, we've got nervous system, we have histrionic issues that have to be addressed. But I really believe the physical part has to be taken care of first. And it needs to be a matter of this person is suffering from something like MS. We have to change that viewpoint so that people will get help sooner. And that's just the truth of it.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say and the way you're framing this is sort of like whole person care for substance use disorders, right? You have to understand it from the genetics all the way through the environment and condition that they currently exist in, and addressing all of those factors, which, I mean, I will never disagree with that about any medical condition, right? I wish we would do that for everything, but I appreciate the way you frame that specifically around reforming the recovery framework and the way we approach people with substance use disorders and talk about this. And so much of it is so sort of, as we've talked about, it's so stuck in an outdated framework that doesn't acknowledge all of the contributing factors.
Right.
And so the way you're approaching this, it's such a relief to hear that people see it that way, that this is possible, that people are out here talking about this. It's so important. And I wish everybody would listen to this. I wish everybody could hear this, because it is so crucial to how we are going to move forward and change the system and reform recovery, which is our entire goal here, right?
Yes.
So thank you
we have to
for
do
sharing
it, because 3 to 5% is pitiful.
Yeah.
It's not. I really got confronted that I have a friend who's a neuroscientist, and she wanted to know a lot about the 12 steps, and we discussed it a lot, and it really hit me in the face that, wow, we're losing the battle. It's like we've just decided that if you happen to have this gene component matched with some, other things, you're screwed.
And McCauley and I have talked about this, but I think you're exactly right. I like to think of it in terms of 3 components of substance use disorders, or developing them. You have to have a genetic component, you have to have an environmental component, and then you have to have the exposure. And, for a lot of people, that exposure is alcohol because it's more readily available. But whatever the exposure is, right? I know I almost certainly have that genetic component. I have a significant family history. What I didn't have was the environment. And I have tried to prevent as much exposure as possible because I know that I have that. But the environmental component, we know the higher your adverse childhood events score is, the more likely you are to develop a substance use disorder. You add that to a known family history with a likely genetic component there, and you have an even higher likelihood, right? So you sort of have this Venn diagram, those 3 things intersecting, and that's exactly what you're talking about. Like, let's acknowledge that. Let's accept that that's part of the puzzle and address those things, because we can't do this if we force everybody into a retrospective, one-size-fits-all approach. And so being able and willing to acknowledge all of those pieces and all of a person's components of their life. You can't change their genetics, but you can help change their environment, and you can help them change their perspective. You can't change the exposure in the past, right?
No.
It's all about moving forward, and it's all about that acceptance, like you said. It's not about forgiveness. So I just so appreciate you saying that. I so appreciate you, coming on and sharing that with us. I want to give you an opportunity, if you have anything you want to plug, or wherever people can find you. I'd love to have you share.
Sure. Well, I definitely, it is I because of the way I work with families, I have a limited amount of people that I can work with, but I have a website. It's KristinaDennis.com. You can reach out to me that way. You can email me, and I do return the emails myself. And really, it's about sharing resources and seeing if there's a match. I have a partner that I work with, Brian O'Shea. He's been around many, many years, and he sends a lot of people to me. Very loving person, very much in the same kind of process of, it's really about love and healing.
I think if anyone, has any questions, or if you're a family member that's out there, I think it's very important to understand that just through the good old internet, you can go and you can find out a lot of information that is up to date. And, you do not have to wait for your loved one to hit rock bottom, or, because that now is really because of the illicit supply and illicit fentanyl and these other analogs and nitazines and, all that. Real rock bottom is usually people dying now. That's where we're at. And people, there's people that don't even have a substance use disorder that are dying because they use something, and that's where we're at. But the thing is again, I just want to echo that you can really find up-to-date information. I encourage people to look into person-first language. I encourage people to look into, stigmatizing language, look into alternatives to 12-step, look into, some of the information we have on adverse childhood events, kind of denounce this traditionalist approach to it, and understand that, if you want your loved one to be alive, then I would suggest leading with evidence-based medications and approaches before you lead with abstinence, because that should be the last fucking thing that we should be leading with. So I just want, again, I'm like not trying to be self-righteous or anything like that, but this is all coming from 3 people who were exposed to the traditional approach and then stepped outside of that and found our way. But you guys want to put a bow on it?
Really appreciate it, Kristina, and thank you for being here. All right, you both have a wonderful day. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and do not represent that of our employers. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please follow up with your doctor regarding your care. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or corrections. Thank you for listening.